Hello fellow canners, and welcome back to Grab Your Jars. I'm Lisa Bishop, and today I'm going to be making blackberry jam. Blackberry jam is basically the same recipe as raspberry and strawberry and a couple of other berries that have a lot of tartness to it. And so if you've watched my raspberry jam video, then you already pretty much know how to make blackberry. If you have not gone back and watched making jam, supplies and preparation, you'll want to do that so that you know what you're going to need. I have all my supplies ready today. I've got jars cleaned and washed and ready to go into a pot for sterilization. I've got my blackberries washed and ready to roll. I'm ready to go. So thanks for joining me. Let's do it. First thing I'm going to do is get my calcium water ready that I talked about in my prep video. So it calls for a half a cup of water and a half a teaspoon of my Pomona's Universal Pectin calcium powder. And I do know that this little bag of calcium powder is a half a teaspoon, so I'm just going to dump the whole thing in because I have measured it before. I'm going to put my lid on here, and I'm just going to shake it up really well to mix it, and then I'll just set it aside until I'm ready for it. I'm going to go ahead and mash my berries. Got the blackberries in here, and I'm using my potato masher. These berries are nice and juicy and soft, and I like to leave some good chunks of my berries in here. I don't like to mash them all the way down to nothingness because I just kind of like to have chunks. So it doesn't take very long. All right, that's about it. Got my fruit crushed with my potato masher here. I'm going to measure out how much fruit I'm putting into my pot. And I'm just going to use a measuring cup here. 1, 2, 3. One batch is 4 cups of fruit, so I'm going to go ahead and just leave what I have left in my pot here and set it aside until I'm ready for my next batch. I'm going to work with this. I'm going to go ahead and add what my recipe calls for my calcium water that I set aside. My Pomona's Universal Pectin says to add 2 teaspoons of calcium water to 4 cups of fruit. So that's what I'll be doing. And then stir it in well. At this point, I have my jars in a pot on the stove, and they are in boiling water and they're getting sterilized. I am getting ready to put this pot on the stove as well. I am going to set this aside for just a moment. I'm going to take my honey and my pectin and mix those together. In case you're wondering, I used 6 of these little pint containers. So like a big, if you were to buy these at a farm stand or something, one of those big little cartons of berries is what I use to get my 4 cups here. So since I'm using 4 cups, the least amount of honey that I can use is a half a cup with 2 teaspoons of pectin. So I'm going to go ahead and use just a half a cup. Oops, got an airplane. Sorry. Because I like using the least amount of sweetener as I can. I've already measured out my 2 teaspoons of pectin, so I'm going to go ahead and get that in here and get it mixed in. So mix that in well together. Don't put it into your pot of fruit and calcium water at this point. It's going to be a bit. You want to mix this really well so that the pectin dissolves. I'm going to go set this on the stove. I now have my berries and my calcium water mixture on the stove. I'm heating it up. I went ahead and tripled my recipe because 2 of those flats of blackberries ended up making 12 cups of crushed fruit. So I went ahead and tripled my recipe. And I also put together my honey and pectin mixture. Now, a 4-cup recipe calls for a 1/2 cup of honey and 2 teaspoons of pectin. So I'm using a 1.5 cups of honey, and I used 6 teaspoons of pectin. I've mixed it up really well. And a little tip here, if you use honey, you want room temperature honey. If you have honey out of the refrigerator or something that's been somewhere cool, it's going to be really hard to work with. So you want room temperature honey. Now I'm just going to set this aside. I'm not going to use it at this point. I'm going to wait until this pot comes to a boil, and then I'm going to add it to it. Another helpful hint I'd like to give you is when you're making jam, wear an apron. I don't know about you guys, but I'm pretty messy, especially when it comes to making jam. I've got blackberry juice everywhere. I've got honey here and there. And so do wear your... As you can see, my berries are starting to boil. You do want to give it an occasional stir so it doesn't stick to the bottom of the pan. This is not at a rolling boil or a good full boil, so I'm going to be patient here. This is getting to a pretty good full boil, so I'm going to go ahead and add my honey or whatever sweetener you're using and my pectin to this. As soon as I get it in there, I'm going to stir very well for 1 to 2 minutes, and then I'm going to start putting it into my jars. I put boiling water on my lids to get these to start softening up. I've taken my fruit off the stove as soon as it boiled for about 2 minutes. Set it over here. I've got my jars that I just took out of the hot boiling water, and I'm ready to start filling them. You can fill your jam jars to about 1/4 inch to the top. I usually leave it at about 1/2 to 1/4. Taking a clean washcloth, and I'm going to wash the rims of all of these jars. It's important to get all the stuff off the rims, otherwise you won't get a nice good seal on your jars. I've got all my rims washed off, getting ready to put my lids on and my screw bands, and then they'll be going into the pot. And again, I'm using a boiling bath water for this, not a pressure canner. Although, as I've told you before, I do use my pressure canner, but I don't lock it down. I don't lock the lid down. I just use it as a big old pot with a rack in it. Screw bands go on firmly tight. And they're ready to go on my pot. I've got all my jars in the pot. I have it covered, my jar is covered by at least 1 inch of water. And I'm putting my lid back on, and I'm just going to wait for it to get back to that rolling boil, and then I will start timing it. For jam, you want to do your boiling bath water for 10 minutes after it gets to a rolling boil. I'm waiting for my water to get back to a rolling boil. I just wanted to let you know that this calcium water that we mixed up a little bit earlier, you can save this for another batch and another day. You just put a lid on it, and then you can refrigerate it. My water is now at a good rolling boil. I am starting a timer for 10 minutes. I'm putting my lid on, but I'm not locking it as I would with a pressure canner. My timer just went off. I'm going to turn my heat off and take my jars out. And let them cool. So I've got all my jars out of my pot. I've got them out here cooling. You can hear that they're sealing. If you have any questions about how to know if your jars are sealing, please go watch my video on how do you know if my jars are sealing. And I will not do anything with these until they've completely cooled. And then as everything else that I can, at that point in time, I'm going to take my jars, wash them, take my screw bands off, and then I'll store the jars in my storage. So this is how to make blackberry jam. Thanks for joining me. I'll see you in the next video. If you like this, please hit like and subscribe below. If you have any questions, put them in the comments and I'll get back with you. Thanks a lot.